This word expert, there's no relationship experts. There's just people who have thought about relationships for a long time. I think it's helpful to know things, to have intellectual understandings and insights about. I was already a world-renowned relationship coach. Take that in, Will. Relationship coach when I met this woman. One of the great lessons that I learned out of that breakup, I was devastated, Will. I was crushed.
There's two different kinds of learning. There's the cognitive, I know that.
I went into the Air Force because at 16, I didn't really know what to do with my life. I just was good at math. The Air Force gave me a scholarship to go to university, paid my school. Who am I? Not just who am I in relationship to my peers, like am I an athlete? Well, I went through a kind of midlife crisis in my 20s. When I got into the military, the contrast, my soul was like, this is not for me. And so when the Air Force spit me out at 26, man, I was so lost.
Welcome to the Willpower podcast. All right, Bryan. So you are a relationship ninja. Can you tell me what that means?
Oh man, that's a legacy title from my younger days. I am I'm a 50 years exquisitely aged man. So I guess back in my late 30s, I started to write about, I was blogging. This is 2012 or so, 2010, even earlier than that. And I was writing a lot about waking up to all the mistakes I had made in relationships that I wasn't aware I was making, all the ways that I was kind of an idiot when it came to love and intimacy. And I thought I was I had a master's degree in human relations. I grew up with 3 sisters and 2 mothers. And I just thought if anybody should know how to do intimacy and relationship is me. And I just disaster after disaster in relationships. And so, in my late 30s, I just threw myself into the study relationship. I was just tired of sucking at it, Will. And I was like, I cannot be destined to suck at this for the rest of my life. So I just started learning the things that should have been taught to me a long time ago, that should be taught to all of us in our younger days. Not when we make a mess of things and lives are smoldering all around us and, one relationship after another is just the wreckage is surround. No, that's not the time to learn. The time to learn is before all those things happen. So anyway, relationship insight ninja is the full title, the full professional title. It really just means a way I've fashioned myself into, this word expert. I love what Esther Perel says. There's no experts. There's no relationship experts. There's just people who have thought about relationships for a long time. And I'm someone who has just dove into the study of relationships, particularly intimate relationships. And I've, come out of that study with insights, with ways of doing things differently that actually create the outcomes people want. And instead of, the old way of what I call just winging it in love. So that is a really long answer to a short question.
Yeah, man, that's I do like that idea of the expert. The expert isn't real. It's just someone who's thought about it a lot.
That's it. Yeah.
Have you noticed that you've gotten better with more thought? Because I've noticed for myself, there are some areas where it feels like the more I think about it, the worse it gets.
That's a great question, man. My mom said something to me when I was probably in my 20s or so. She said, and my mom's a thinker, and my mom said to me, Bryan, you think too much. And I didn't really know what she meant at the time. But now that I've been married, or at least with my wife, for 10 years, and I've been coaching couples, I've been doing relationship coaching for men and women for, 13 years. I think it's helpful to know things, to have intellectual understandings and insights about what can work, what doesn't work. There's a place for thought. We need our fucking thoughts, right? It doesn't serve us to not have our thoughts and ideas and all that. However, I do see over and over, and I certainly have seen this in myself and my experiences, Thinking too much fucks us up. It is so easy to overthink relational issues such that when we disconnect from our bodies, we don't know how to feel our emotions, especially us men, but women do this too. But men, we get up into our heads. We want to fix things, and we're always intellectualizing what that even means. Yeah, man, it can. My capacity to think a lot has been my one of my greatest gifts, but also one of my biggest curses, especially when it comes to intimate relationships with women.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It's a delicate balance to walk between the
It
thinking and feeling and
it
doing.
is. My the woman that I'm with, Sylvie, my wife, she when I met her, I was like crushing it professionally. I mean, this is, yeah, I met her 10 years ago. So I was already a like world renowned relationship coach. Take that in, Will, relationship coach when I met this woman. This was early in the days. There weren't men really revealing their relationship challenges. Now it's all over the place. It's just common. That's the internet now. Everyone's doing vulnerability, and that's great. But at the time, it was pretty rare, and so I really made a name for myself in early days. And then I met this woman, and I thought again, like, dude, I got this shit figured out, dialed in. I had already written the article "Choose Her Every Day or Leave Her," which went viral, which I turned into my second book. And then Sylvie broke up with me 4 months in. She broke up with me. Now, the reasons why are complex. It's not so black and white. But one of the great lessons that I learned out of that breakup, we got back together less than a month after she ended our relationship, our young relationship. I was devastated, Will. I was crushed. And one of the things I realized, though, is I had so much knowledge and information, but I didn't really yet know how to connect to my heart, not reliably. I could go to a weekend workshop, do some ayahuasca or something, and connect to my heart. Like I could do that, but I couldn't in the midst of my girlfriend's frustration or upset or complaint. I had no idea how to connect to my heart, right? So I had all this information, but I had no capacity to just take a deep breath, open my heart, relax my body, and listen, right? And that really taught me, her breaking up with me really taught me that, no amount of knowledge or information will ever be substitute for just knowing how to stay in my heart.
Yeah, I love this. Like, there's two different kinds of learning. There's the cognitive, the like, okay, I know that. I can read all these
Yeah.
books, I can watch videos, and then there's like the emotional learning, which is like I've been through it, I've experienced it. I know what it feels like to have a conversation with my partner. I know what that brings up in me. I know how to react. And you can't learn the emotional one through books. Like it just doesn't. You have to go through it to actually truly learn that.
Yeah, it's converting knowledge into wisdom. It's
That's
not
it.
wisdom until it's in your bones.
Hmm.
Until it's in your bones, it's just information.
Very true. So, Brian, you were a captain in the Air Force, as we briefly touched on. Can you tell me a little bit about that and then how that, like, that's a huge shift, right, into what
Oh
you do
yeah.
now. So, what was that transition like?
Yeah, well, man, so I went into the Air Force because at 16, I didn't really know what to do with my life. I just was good at math. And so, again, I didn't really have any good guidance from any elders, like a lot of us, especially in that generation, and perhaps even now today, I don't know. But nobody was really helping me figure anything useful out about my future. And so the Air Force gave me a scholarship to go to university, paid my school, and was like, all right, well, this is as good as any other option I have. So I did that. And then they owned me for, a decade, essentially. And, that was that time of adolescence and early adulthood. Really, I wouldn't even call it early adulthood. I would call it late adolescence. Adolescence is a time where we're really trying to figure out, who am I? Not just who am I in relationship to my peers, like am I an athlete? Am I a science nerd? Am I a goth? Whatever. Am I a punk rocker? Whatever. Not even that. That's kind of in relationship to our peers. but who am I in relationship to the cosmos, man, to God, to life? Like, what the hell am I doing here? Who am I really? Like, that's a question every adolescent should be wrestling with. Most of our culture doesn't support that question, right? That questioning, that inquiry. Most of our culture just says, go get your job, especially our culture here in the States. Go to high school, go to college, go get your job, make your money, make your name, whatever, get comfortable, just get all the things, check all the boxes, which that spits most people out into their 40s or 50s, and then you have a midlife crisis because it's like, what the hell did I just do with my life? I don't even know who I am. Well, I went through a kind of midlife crisis in my 20s because I knew when I got into the military, the contrast, like my soul was like, this is not for me. This is not for me at all. But I was locked in for a 10-year stint because they paid my way through school, and so I owed them time after school. And so it was very painful for me. All that to say, it was an incredibly painful, like on a soul level experience. I'm very grateful that I'm proud of my service. I'm grateful that I got to serve in the U.S. Air Force, and it was incredibly painful. So when I got out at 26, I was very well educated. I had a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, which again I didn't really care about. It was just I did it because it's what I was good at, but I didn't love it. And when I was in the military, I got a master's degree in human relations. Like that began my switch. Like I really wanted to just study people. It's like, what's it like to be a human? Like, who are we? I was asking that question. Who are we? What are we really doing here? And so when the Air Force spit me out at 26, man, I was so lost. I was so lost. I was so disconnected from my body. I felt useless to the world. Where a lot of my military buddies were separating and then they'd go to work for, Boeing or Lockheed Martin or Rockwell, one of the big defense contractors, probably double their salary. I had that offer and it was such a clear no to me. I didn't know what the alternative was, but I knew that was not the path for me. And that thrust me into, a really pretty significant identity crisis. And I just wandered the world for literally a year and a half, not really knowing what to do with myself and getting into all kinds of misadventures but that all set me on the path to where I am today.
You think that wandering period is necessary?
I do. I think it's extremely necessary. I think it's necessary. I think it's best done in late adolescence, right? When we're asking the question, who am I? What am I really here for? Before we step into, adulthood is a time of taking responsibility, of taking my place in society, doing the work that I'm now here to do, giving my gift back to the community. That's one of the roles of adulthood. Most of us go into adulthood without having done the wandering. We just take our cues from mom and dad or the society around us. It's like, okay, yeah, it's time for me to just go make money now. Play whatever my role is, but my role is to make money. And I think for a lot of people, probably most people on the circuit, that's pretty empty after a while. So I was in a way, I felt very fortunate that I got to do that young. Again, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what else to do. But I've worked with a lot of people that get into their 40s and 50s. Again, they've done everything they were supposed to do, and now they're just like, I'm so over this. And it's interesting, at that time they want to wander, but they have obligations. They got spouses and kids and career momentum and these things. And man, that's a really interesting crisis to see someone step into it in their 40s and 50s or even 60s. So yeah, man, wandering is essential. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, we almost get stuck in these like loops, and then you have to wait until a certain point. A lot of it is financial, that once you are become dependent, you have, or once people are dependent on you, you have a mortgage, stuff like that. You have to get to a certain point financially to even consider the idea of wandering and having that kind of period.
How old are you, Will?
I'm 24.
24, man. Have you been able to wander yet?
I have not. I am actually going into that period. That's
What's
something I'm
the So let me ask you, like, as I talk about this, like, how does that resonate for you? Does it
Yeah,
excite you?
so
Does it scare you? Does it?
very much excites me. I've gone through basically like I went to school, I finished school early, I got a good job as
Hmm.
a software engineer. I've now worked there in software engineering for like 4 years. I can see the path I could follow, and I could be very safe, very secure, very comfortable. And
Yeah.
at the same time, I'm like, this is not what I want to do. So yeah, that's something I'm doing this year is going to be going off my own and just wandering, like you said,
Oh man,
seeing what I
that's
find.
that's that's a beautiful and profound and I think again vital thing to do. I'm excited for you. I feel very much again when I was 24, I didn't really have choice in the sense that if I just left my military post, I could be court-martialed. I'd be put in jail. And like I didn't, I couldn't just choose to wander whenever I wanted. And in a way that created a lot of pain, such that when I turned 26 and got out of the military finally after 10 years, I was so like a rubber band pulled back, ready to snap. I was so ready to just fling myself into the world with almost reckless abandon.
Mhm.
I remember before I went to my mom's house right after I got out of the military. I was stationed at Patrick Air Force Base in Florida, and I drove up the coast for a couple days to my mom's in Maryland. And I was going to take a military jet, my last military flight out to somewhere in England, I think Lakenheath, one of the Royal Air Force bases in England where I had a friend. And I just had a backpack and my little travel guitar, and it was just like, let's go. And I remember telling my mom, it's in retrospect, this is so adorable, but I really needed to believe this. My psyche needed to believe what I was about to say. I told my mom, I said, Mom, I may never come back. Again, in retrospect, I said that, 20, almost 25 years ago, Will. And what I realized is my psyche, I needed to leave behind the boyhood identity, the adolescent identity. I needed to leave behind this who I used to be when I was doing, what the world thought, what society around me was telling me to do. I needed to leave that identity behind because it didn't fit. And I needed to find the new me. So I thought I meant it literally, like, Mom, you may never see me again, right? Oh my God, it was so ridiculous. But what I was really saying is, in a way, like, Mom, the boy you see in front of you, you're never going to see him again because I'm going into the world to wander, to find myself, to find my true self, to find my soul, such that when I come back, I won't be the same person, right? So I'm really excited for you, man. I'm curious, what is wandering going to look like for
You
you?
may not find. For me, it looks like not having a steady income, just figuring it out for myself, having time freedom, figuring out what to do with myself, what to spend time on,
That's
what I enjoy
fantastic.
doing.
Yeah, that's great. Will you travel?
Hopefully, yeah. So I have a dog, and that kind of limits
It does. Yeah.
traveling a little bit, but that's something I've been meaning to do more is like road tripping and
Yeah.
just going in and living other places.
And I think that that's an important part of wandering is that you see how other people live. The whole point of wandering is you're exposing yourself to environments, people, influences, ideas that you would never otherwise come into contact with when you're just doing your daily routine.
Mm-hmm.
So and the other thing about wandering, and I know it's hard in this world, and I'm not saying it always has to be like this, but I do think it can be helpful to not put an end date on it. Like, I'm just going to do this for 30 days. In a way, again, your psyche, this is a rite of passage, Will, that you're setting yourself upon. My guess is you don't have any like wise elder men, and maybe you do. You tell me if I'm wrong about that, because we're just getting to know each other. But my guess is you don't have any wise elder men really helping you create a rite of passage out of this experience. Is
Yeah,
that fair
I
to
would say
say?
that's generally correct. Yeah.
And you're doing this because there's something instinctively in you that knows you've got to let go of what's been safe. You said it earlier. What's safe,
Hmm.
what's comfortable, what's known. You have to step away from that in order to find a deeper truth within you, right? But probably there's no elder men, or you're lucky to have one, who's encouraging that, who's telling you, yes, leave safety. I mean, I might be the only elder, I guess I'm an elder man now, but encouraging you, yes, man, you have to do this for you, for the sake of your soul,
Right.
and for the sake of the community, so that we get the best version of you on the other side, and not just what most men do. When who don't do this, society gets hollowed out versions of men. We get older versions of men that are kind of just grumpy and unhappy and disconnected and going through the motions and checked out and distracted by all kinds of addictions. We don't get men that are really alive.
That's such a good point. I hadn't even thought of that as like I'm doing this not just for myself, but for
You're
who
doing
I'll
it for the
become and the impact I can have.
you're doing it for, you have a girlfriend, partner, wife?
I have a girlfriend. Yep.
You're doing it for her too, long term.
Yeah.
I'm curious, does she support you? Is she nervous? Is she?
She's full on board. I mean, like, I'm sure she has her own anxieties around it, but
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
overall, she is 100% in.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear it, man. Well,
Yeah.
I'm excited for you, Will. It's a big, big deal.
Yeah,
Good
it's
on
a
you.
very exciting. It's exciting and it's also like it's hard to explain sometimes.
Sure.
I've noticed that. It's when people ask me about it, they're like, "You have a job, it pays you
Ah.
well. You don't have to do that much for your job. Like what's the problem here?"
Oh my God, I know. Well, again, man, that's culture. That's culture that doesn't that there's no place for wandering in people's
Hmm.
minds. Just play it safe, man. Be
Right.
comfortable. You have your money. Why would you upset that? Forgive them for what they do not know.
Right. And I think money is such an easily measurable thing that
Hmm.
when, this other idea of like wandering and finding yourself and going out into the unknown it's so immeasurable that
Yeah.
it's easier to just take the path that is like, okay, clearly I'm leveling up because I make more money and all this. It's
Yeah.
just easier to quantitate.
Yeah. A friend of mine pointed out, he was brilliant in this observation. His name's Kyle Cease. He would point out that a lot of times when we're at the cusp of some kind of transformational experience, our brains look at and can see very clearly what we're going to lose. Okay, you're going to lose income, right? You're going to lose a job title. You're going to lose security, whatever the hell that means, or at least the illusion of it, right? Because who really has security, and who knows that tomorrow you're going to have what you have today? Nobody. But regardless, you can measure, you can see those things, but what you cannot see is what you will gain from the experience. And you're right, in a world that is more survival oriented, which we are, our brains don't care about us thriving. They care about us just surviving. The easier path is just look at what you're going to lose and go, well, I don't want to lose that. So let me hold on to it. And it is an act of soul. It is an act of deep calling to be willing to let go of what you know is not for you. So that I call it crossing the chasm, right? The chasm. Most people don't want to cross the chasm because it's scary. There's like no, you don't even know what's in the chasm. It's not like you just give up your job and then, on Monday and then on Tuesday, you know exactly what you're supposed to do in the world and you're making money doing it. It doesn't work like that. The wandering, the chasm, crossing the chasm, it can take years to find your way across that chasm. I mean, years. It ain't weeks, that's for shit sure.
Mhm.
And really, in my experience, it ain't months either, right? But again, everyone's gonna have their own experience, but it does take courage, and that's why I think most people don't do that work.
Right.
And I think our world is the worse off for it.
So, okay, tell me about your, experience crossing that chasm yourself.
Well, so I got out of the military, grabbed a backpack, and just went, man, just went like, walkabout, like, Aboriginal walkabout. Just, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how long I'm going for. I just know I need to go. And I did that. I went over to Europe. But 30 days in, I was backpacking through Wales. I went into Ireland. I was so lost, man. I was so, my identity had been so wrapped up in being a military officer. I was a captain in the Air Force. And yet all I wanted to do was not be a captain in the Air Force anymore. But now I'm wandering around, I'm growing my hair long, I got an earring in, I'm trying to smoke marijuana, like, because I want to feel something. I couldn't feel anything. And I remember, people didn't treat me very well. They treated me like the vagabond I was trying to be. And that didn't feel good because I used to be a captain in the Air Force. And every time someone would ask about me, I would say, yeah, I was a captain in the Air Force. I like, I ran back to that identity immediately. And about 30 days in, I kind of had a nervous breakdown in a phone booth in North Wales because I knew I couldn't go backwards, but I didn't know where to go forwards. I was lost, utterly, utterly lost. And this was in 2001, so there was no it's social media. At best there were cyber cafes. There weren't even really cell phones at that time. There were just you had to go to a cyber cafe, to email your friends back home and so I was so utterly alone in the world. And like, to your point too, like nobody really knew what I was doing. Nobody really understood what I was doing. When I told my mom I may never come back, she probably just thought, oh my God, you're being ridiculous, so melodramatic, whatever. See you in a couple weeks. That's probably in her mind. There was no awareness in the world around me of what I was doing. And so I didn't even know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to do it. Anyway, I got through that moment and I just kept going. It took me to Egypt for a couple months. I went to India for another couple months. I went to Australia, into the outback. Like I just wandered, man, for a year and a half. And I ended up even marrying a French woman in France 5 weeks after I met her. Ill-advised. I don't recommend that approach. But, again, I couldn't feel anything. I was so lost. And I met this woman who she kind of gave me some direction. She liked me and I really needed to be liked. And she gave me some direction, and then it was an utter disaster. But that was, I mean, all of that, that was 2001 that I left the military, and I think I wound up about maybe 2.5 years later in Miami, Florida, living with my father, just licking my wounds from my travels and my recent divorce. And I started to help him build a business, and that set me off on a whole new chapter of life. I mean, there's just a million more. I could just talk for an hour about this whole journey, right? But I'll stop there.
Okay, so let's talk specifically about relationships. So
Yeah,
you mentioned this marriage in
yeah,
France.
yeah,
What did you have like any patterns that you noticed looking back that would come up repeatedly?
definitely. Oh yeah, man, for sure. I had no idea that about how to have boundaries, for example. None. I didn't even know men needed boundaries. I didn't know anyone needed boundaries. I didn't never even heard the word boundaries before. I had no idea how to do conflict well. I knew how to fight. I knew how to argue. I didn't know how to resolve anything. I didn't know how to repair. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I was a fucking mess. Will, and by the way, I think this is how most people are in relationships, at least at the start. We just, again, I was doing what I like to call the wing it method of relationship. I was just winging it. And man, yeah, I just was a complete and utter fool. I had no idea how to stand up for myself. I was married to this strong, beautiful, opinionated French woman who just kind of trampled all over me. And I didn't know how to stand up for myself. It's partly why I think she trampled over me because I didn't have boundaries, right? I mean, again, so much more I could say about that, but
So
yeah, man.
what does that look like? Like if you ran into someone today who is
Mhm.
having this exact same issue, I've definitely in my last relationship, I could relate to that.
Mhm.
What is like how do you guide people through setting boundaries and standing up for
Yeah.
themselves?
Well, I'll just give you an example from from that relationship in France. I remember I was helping her move out of her apartment. We had just met and I was helping her move from one apartment to another. And I remember she left, I was vacuuming her apartment. And I remember she came home after being gone for like 20 minutes or so. And I don't remember exactly her complaint, but she got really upset at me because maybe it was I didn't vacuum enough or something. Whatever. She was not happy with something that I had done and spoke really harshly to me. And rather than set a boundary and tell her, you don't talk to me like that. You're allowed to be frustrated and upset and this and that, but whatever's going on for you, but you're not allowed to speak disrespectfully to me. That's not going to work for me, right? I didn't know how to say that. All I knew how to do was go, go fuck yourself. What the fuck? Do you understand what I've just been doing for all I knew how to do was argue, defend myself, counterattack. That's all I knew. I didn't know how to actually have boundaries, right? So, one of the things that I just one of the first things people have to get clear about when it comes to boundaries is like, well, what works for you and what doesn't. What does not work for me is name calling, right? But I'll give you another example from a later relationship. I had a girlfriend. I was with her for years, and she would call me names. She would call my friends names, and rather than and I knew name calling was like you don't do that. Like I knew that. You didn't have to convince me. I
Hmm.
knew that was not okay. But I still didn't know how to stand for a boundary. All I knew how to do was argue. So she'd call me a name or she'd call a friend a name, and I would just say, "Stop that, don't do that." And she'd go, "What?" She would say this thing. It probably came from her own jealousy. I don't know. We never got a chance to really explore it, but I had a female friend, and she would call her my fat friend. That was really fucking offensive. It wasn't in term of endearment. It was harsh. And I would be like, dude, what the fuck? Don't call her my fat friend. And she's like, who, your fat friend? And I would get, oh, dude, we had some epic arguments in those moments. So it's like I knew it was a boundary, but I still didn't know how to speak to it, right? But that's the first step. You got to get clear about what's a no, what's not okay, and what you can live with. I can't live with name calling. But that's first step. Second step then is, well, now how do you speak that boundary into existence in a way that is respectful, loving, and clear, but firm, right? And has consequences. As part of it, I didn't really know how to let there be consequences, right? So she just keeps saying my fat friend, and I would just stay and fight, you know? In retrospect, in the practice of boundaries now, I know, being very clear, it's not okay that you call my friends names. Like, that's not going to work for me. I'm not going to stay in a conversation with you where you're doing that, right? If she says, "Who, your fat friend?" I say, "Look, please stop that. If you say that one more time, I'm gonna leave the room." "Oh, your fat friend?" Deep breath. "I love you. I'm stepping out. I'm not doing this." Right? I mean, those are actual consequences. I had no idea how to do any of that. Right? But that's kind of the beginnings of having boundaries, is first knowing, well, what are they? And then second, how do I speak to them in a way that is both powerful but also still loving and respectful, right?
Yeah, Robert Glover, No More Mr. Nice Guy, he talks about this like
Yeah.
testing boundaries idea that it's not like you can't just put up a boundary and then expect everything to be fixed. People will often test them
Of
immediately.
course. Oh, especially if you haven't had them in a relationship for a while. You think all of a sudden they're just going to be like, "Oh, great. Now you have boundaries?
Hmm.
Sure, let's do it."
Yeah.
No, of course not. They aren't going to believe you. They're not going to trust your boundaries. They aren't going to like the new arrangement. Yeah, it obviously depending on lots of factors. You have to be really clear. Is this really what I call a non-negotiable boundary? Or another word for that is a requirement, right? It's a requirement that my partner doesn't call me or my friends names. That's not a request. It's a requirement. It's clear to me.
Hmm.
Where most relationships come off the rails is they don't distinguish between their requests and their requirements. They pretend that their requirements are only requests, right? Or they pretend that their requests are requirements. They don't really get clear about the two, right? If it's a requirement, it means I'm not staying in this, certainly not in this conversation, and potentially not in this relationship if this requirement isn't honored. Whereas if it's just a request, you know what? If you don't want to honor this request, it's on me to figure out how to be okay with that and
Hmm.
not just be a pain in your ass because you won't meet my request. You
Okay,
know,
this is one I struggle with because I think for me, I want everything to just be a request because I want to be like this independent
uh, yeah,
person who doesn't need anything from anyone, and like I can't have requirements. I can only ask people, and if they don't want to do it, or if my girlfriend doesn't want to do something, like I got to figure it out.
yeah. Ooh, yeah. It's interesting. I was just going through a lot of my Instagram posts. My wife and I are doing some promotional stuff, and she said, send me like your top performing Instagram posts, for the last number of years." And one of my posts, I'm just gonna, rather than try to look for it, I'm just gonna paraphrase it because it
Mhm.
speaks to this. It speaks to this. Something to the effect of, you can't build a solid foundation of relationship on the shifty, I think I say shitty, grounds of pretending you don't have any needs. You can't, right? You can't build a relationship on the shitty foundation of pretending you don't have needs. Everybody has needs, and I know that us men, especially, we have been, women have been conditioned to just not get their needs met. They've been conditioned that they're needy, but it's not a man's job to meet her needs. Men have just been conditioned to not have needs at all. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Be a man. You should, be the self-made man, millionaire, whatever. The self-made man. That doesn't exist. There's no
Right.
such thing as a self-made man, right? That's a myth of our culture, and yet that's what we men are taught. And so, one of the, courageous acts when I work with men on relationship issues, one of the most courageous and confronting practices we'll do is get in touch with our needs, with that man's needs. What do you need that isn't being offered to you? For example, a lot of men, the idea of praise. A lot of men will say, and I said this for most of my life, like, I don't need praise. I don't need praise. I'm fine. Whatever. I don't need. And yet, we men define our identity by our performance in the world. If I do good, I am good, right? How do I know if I do good? Well, if I'm not getting any praise, I can't possibly know if I'm doing good. And yet at the same time, I'm going to tell you I don't need praise. And then what are we often met with in relationships is more criticism than praise. I think it's a fairly rare woman that offers more praise than critique or upset. And that's not a critique of women. I mean, we men suck at that too. We're not very praising either. We offer way more critique and criticism and upset and frustration than we than we do know how to offer praise, right? But that's one thing, one of the things that I hear from so often when, especially men that have been raising families and going to work and just taking care of the structure, the logistics of life. And one of the biggest complaints is they don't feel appreciated. They don't get the praise. They don't get the gratitude. They don't get the, honey, thank you so much for all that you do for us. You're 24. That may not seem so important to you today, but you spend 20 years, Will, doing all the things you're supposed to do as a man, right? And be with a woman who gives you no praise, right? Who only wants to tell you the things you're not doing well. You're a fucking exploding, ticking time bomb in that scenario, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember reading this in one of Jordan Peterson's books where he says to give like 5 compliments for every one negative with your partner.
Yeah, that's
Something
actually
like that.
from the Gottman Institute.
Okay.
The Gottmans, who've studied couples for decades in laboratory settings, they've found that the golden ratio is 5 compliments or positive comments for
Positive.
every
Yeah.
negative or neutral comment, I guess, or interaction really, is what makes for a really healthy relationship.
But just to push back a little bit, like for me, this idea of asking for praise almost
Mhm.
like makes it illegitimate. It's like, oh, I asked you to do this, now you give me praise.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that's like, okay, well, if you weren't going to give me the praise, maybe you didn't mean it,
Yeah.
you know?
I understand that. I get that. Will, what's fascinating is when I work with couples, one of the things that I'll often do is I'll say the words. For example, one of the common problems that I deal with in couples is where, again, man thinks he's doing all the right things. Woman is still dissatisfied because she doesn't feel connected. But he doesn't understand what that means. So I'll model for him connecting language. And I'll say something like, honey, your feelings really matter to me. I'll say it. The woman, in many cases, she'll go, oh, I'll see her nervous system go, oh. Well, I'm not even her fucking husband saying it, but it's speaking to her nervous system. It's words she's longing to hear.
Mm,
It's contrived. I'm modeling it. It's like I don't even know them or her, and yet to hear those words bypasses. Yes, there's a conscious thing that's going to reject it and resist it, and that can happen surely, and you're going to do it. And though part of your job to be a good partner to your girlfriend is two parts of this. One, yeah, you do ask for what you want. Ask for what would be helpful. Say, you know what? And I challenge you, Will, to even try this. Tell her, you know what? I'm experimenting with something. I'd really like to hear more. You speak gratitude sometimes. Like if I take us out to dinner or whatever, and maybe she does this already, right? So take it to somewhere that she doesn't already do it. It'd be really helpful. Give me one compliment a day about something you see that I'm doing well. And then when she does it, Will, and your brain goes, you're just doing blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Let that go and just say thank you, right? Just take it in. Just say thank you. Because the reality is anyway, Will, the thing that she's seeing, you are doing, probably, right? And one of the most important things for men that few of us have in our lives is being witnessed by someone else in the ways that we are succeeding, but also in the ways that we're struggling. Just being witnessed, being seen, right? Most of us men are living our lives alone. We're lone wolfing it. We don't have other men that we can really talk to. We feel isolated in many ways, even if we're doing fine. Having someone mirror back and say, dude, I see you. I see what you're up to, man. I see the ways you're showing up. I see all the podcasts that you've done. It's not easy to have a podcast. Good on you, you know? Or I see how you're struggling, man. I see what you're carrying right now. And it's okay. It's normal. Having someone who's close to you, who knows you, say those things back to you. And yeah, we often do have to train each other how to treat us, and I know it can feel contrived, but on a success, how do I say this? I think an essential relationship skill is to be able to tell your partner what you need. And then when they offer it to you, just say thank you. Rather than you're only doing that because I told you. Well, how the fuck else would they know to do it if you didn't tell them? So it's like, don't set them up to fail, set them
right.
up to succeed. And then when they do the succeeding, just say, thank you.
Right. Yeah,
Is
it's
that
funny.
helpful? Is that helpful?
Yes, definitely. I think this fear of like, oh, she's only going to do it because I asked is almost like just like a first layer of my
Yeah.
reaction to it,
Yeah.
but it tends to be what actually stops me or has stopped me in the past. And it's
Yeah.
kind of an ego thing. It's like my ego being like, you, like, if you're good enough, then she will notice it and she will tell you.
Right. It's like, I totally get that. I'm thinking back to that's another pattern. You asked me a great question earlier. Like that was another pattern that I didn't realize I didn't know how to do was like ask for what I want. It's like imagine asking, saying I would really like a blowjob tonight. And then she gives you a blowjob and you're like, I don't want your blowjob. You're only doing it because I asked you. Man, go fuck yourself, guy, because I mean, your partner wants to, in a healthy relationship, your partner wants to give you what you need. It may not be easy for them. It may not be second nature, but that's also why we have to tell them, right? As one of the things that I didn't know how to do was communicate my desire, what I wanted. I mean, sexually, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to do it just relationally. I didn't know how to do it. I just had no idea. I was very much like you in that mindset of, look, if it'll get done if it's important to them. Doesn't matter if it's important to me. Well, that was a recipe for fucking misery and resentment also, by the way, because over time it's like, well, damn, I mean, that French wife, dude, we stopped having sex really fast. And I was so hurt and frustrated and growing resentment, and it would come out sideways. I didn't know how to just say, I don't understand what's happening. Can we talk about this? Like, why aren't you wanting to have sex with me? I don't get it. What's going on? Can we explore that? I didn't know how to do that well. I just knew how to stay quiet and seethe and be
Hmm.
resentful
Hmm.
and then punish her in other ways, expecting like somehow that's going to get me laid. Oh my God, that only made it worse. Anyway,
That's such a tricky one too, because it is like a that again is like the default reaction in almost every guy is to just like shut down and like yeah, just build up that anger inside because you don't know. And that's the real reason is you just don't understand.
totally don't understand. We take it personal. We make it mean something about me. Oh, she doesn't like me. Oh, yeah, I'm a piece of shit. I don't deserve it anyway. I'm not good enough for her. Whatever. All the it just sort of validates our own crazy stories about ourselves. Or the on the other side is, God, yeah, women are just they're fucking impossible. Oh my God, she's such a bitch. Ugh, whatever. We're just living in our own little echo chamber. Meanwhile, the relationship is deteriorating into disconnection and probably chaos. Certainly resentment and disconnection. And we're over here thinking, man, if she would just figure it out, then everything would be okay. Well, I'm the one that needs to figure some shit out, right? What if that's the way it is? What if I just figure some shit out, then I can actually begin to show up differently and maybe create a different outcome.
Okay, I have an interesting question for you. If you had to pick one rule for cultivating thriving relationships, what would that one rule be? Like if you could meet with a couple one time and just be like, here's the one thing, like the most important thing I could tell you.
I would probably say each of you have to take 100% responsibility for this relationship. If you're waiting for the other person to go first, or if you're waiting for them to change so that this gets better, it's going to fail. Take 100% responsibility for the success or failure of this relationship, which means own what is yours to own. Own where you're not showing up. Own where you're being critical. Own, instead of pointing the finger over there, trying to get them to do their 100%. If you're looking at their responsibility, then you're not owning yours. So if you can both, relationships aren't 50-50 deals, they're 100-100 deals. Anything less than that, and your relationship is going to suffer. And then we can work from there because then now we can talk about like, well, what does that mean? What is my 100%? Right? And that's really the only, I think that's the most important question. What's my part in this? What's my 100% to own? You stay focused on that. Oh man, you pretty much have great relationships.
What does that look like for you?
Well, for me, my 100% means I tend to be a bit more avoidant in my approach to relationships. I'm a bit more standoffish. I'm a bit more like, it's like intimacy can be overwhelming for me. I can withdraw in a million kinds of ways. So, my 100% means I'll make sure every day I get up that I'm making a commitment to lean into relationship, not lean out. Because that's my tendency to lean out. Like both my wife and I work at home. It'd be so easy. I wake up before her. It'd be so easy to just get into my work and then not see her all day. Lock my door and just, she doesn't exist. That's not healthy for our marriage, right? So instead, when she gets up, even if I'm working, if I'm not in a meeting or an interview or something, I get up and I go see her, or when she comes to my office, I get up and we hug. I lean into relationship, right? It's not my natural tendency to do that, but that's me taking ownership. This is my part. My part is to show up, right? My part is to lean in. My part is to, if she's frustrated and upset about something, my part is to, well, first have boundaries, right? It's not going to work if she's frustrated and upset and speaks disrespectfully to me. That part of my 100% is making sure that I'm clear where my boundaries are. Again, I wasn't always clear. And then, you know, every human can act like a monster when there's no boundaries. We're all assholes on some level. And if we're with someone that has no boundaries and the asshole we get triggered, oh man. So, I was faced with a lot of asshole women in my past, but I can't really blame them. I was the one that didn't know how to have boundaries. I mean, I can blame them, but that's pointless. Again, my 100% is I didn't have boundaries. So That's part of my 100%. Make sure I have clear boundaries. Make sure I'm not pretending they're not boundaries, right? That's my 100%. My wife needs to be clear what my boundaries are. And I need to speak them lovingly, respectfully. I need to speak them in ways that honor her. Right? This is all my 100%. There's so much richness in exploring just what is mine here, right? I mean, so again, I can just keep going and going. There's just so much.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of power in determining what your circle of responsibility is, like what you have control over, and then kind of letting go of everything else and taking full ownership
Yeah,
over that circle.
I think that's a really great way of putting it. I was just doing a session with a group of men the other day, and we were talking about, standing in your power. What does that mean to stand in your power? And we talked about how do we leak power as men, especially in relationships. And one of the ways that we leak power or that we don't stand in our power is when we try to exert power where we have no power. And I don't have any power over what my wife thinks, right? Or even what she does. I don't have any power over my wife as a human. None. What I do have power over is my language. I have power over my tone of voice. I can't make my wife use a certain tone of voice, but what I can do is say, babe, could you please shift your tone of voice a little bit? I'm having a hard time taking you in right now. Just as an example, right? That I have power over, but I can't force her or demand her to change anything. And it's the same way, like she can't make me drive slower. I like to drive the speed I like to drive. If she's trying to exert power over me by telling me how to drive, it usually doesn't go well. Even if I do the thing, no, I'm just, the risk is it's, I'm going to feel emasculated, right? Like
Hmm.
mommy's telling me how to drive, right? So it doesn't tend to go well. But what she can do is say, I don't really feel safe right now. I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling a little anxious. I'm getting a little nauseous. She can be vulnerable, right? She has power over that. And then I have a choice to respond, right? And my 100% though is again leaning in. Okay, she's giving me vulnerable feedback that there's something happening for her. I have a choice. I can either respond in a way that cares for her, or I can say, well, not my problem. Consequences on either path. And look, if we're fleeing somebody who's got a gun and is chasing us, I might say, babe, I hear you. I've got to drive fast right now. I love you, but I got to get us to safety. And right now, your feelings about this don't matter, right? But that's pretty much never what's happening.
Hmm. It's
I
it's not the
usually
norm.
just, it's not the norm. I usually just, I don't know, want to get where we're going 5 seconds faster. Why? No fucking good reason ever. So again, my 100% is to hear that, recognize it, feel whatever resistance I may have, and just take a deep breath and then slow down.
What does your dream life look like?
Definitely a mountain cabin, a big old mountain cabin, um, with a writing desk in an office that just overlooks the most epic, awe-inspiring view. My wife doing whatever she's doing around the house, working, whatever, just there doing her thing. Probably good 2, 3 kids playing in the yard, riding bikes. Man, dogs running around, and every Friday night we have game night with friends that come over. We have a potluck on Sunday, and we get all 4 seasons. I've lived in Southern California. I haven't had 4 seasons for
Mhm.
a long time. Yeah, it's my ambitions have definitely changed. I think when I was younger, I I think this is often a sign of just sort of, the adolescent desire to have significance. I wanted to have a big impact on the world. I think even in the coaching world, there's this whole there. I haven't heard it as much lately, but there was a time where everyone was like, "We're going to impact, 100 million people by 2020,
Mhm.
or we're going to change the world by impacting 18 billion people by next year, next August." And man, I think that's a real kind of arrogant approach to things. It's a very youthful, adolescent, arrogant approach to things. And now I just want to enjoy my days. I want to do good work that I'm proud of, have a great relationship with my wife, um, and just, go to bed feeling good about the day. That's really a perfect life.
All right, Bryan Reeves. Thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it. This was a really cool conversation.
Yeah, you're very welcome, man. I love you're at such a ripe age, Will, and I'm excited for you, man. And just want you to know I'm proud of you, man, for being willing to step away from what's comfortable and safe, and to forge your own, find your own path in life, man. It's a courageous act in this world, and so I wish you the best with it.
Where can people find more about you, keep up with you?
Yeah, my website, bryanreeves.com. It's Bryan with a Y, Reeves.com. I have a couple books. You can find them on Amazon. You can just look up my name, Bryan Reeves. It's Bryan with a Y, Reeves. And but yeah, my website, one stop shopping. I'm also, on all the socials, and yeah, man.
Bye, everybody.